Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan Troxel, and in this episode, I welcome Charles Portelli, FAIA. Charlie is an associate and digital innovation strategist at Perkins&Will, and he's been building at the intersection of design and technology for his entire career. He started as one of those rare students who showed up to the first day of architecture school already animating in 3D Studio Max. He spent nearly a decade at KPF doing computational design and facade work on skyscrapers, then made a deliberate leap into a Google X spinout called Flux, where he became a product manager overseeing a team of 15 software engineers. From there, he went to Thornton Tomasetti's core studio, where he eventually took over a structural interoperability startup called Konstru, ran it essentially solo, and even got it to break even. He's now been back in the architecture world at Perkins&Will for a few years, co-leading their I/O group, building internal tools for a firm of thousands. Oh, and somewhere along the way, he found time to become FAIA in a category that AIA didn't have a direct slot for. In this episode, we explore the arc of a career that never fit a clean job title. We talk about what it actually takes to build software tools inside a large firm, how product management thinking applies and doesn't apply to architectural project management, and why the most valuable work in a technology group is often the least glamorous. Getting project names to match across platforms, automating spec kickoffs, making sure nobody has to copy and paste an email address into BIM 360 ever again. You get the idea. And there's a bigger thread running through this whole conversation. Charlie spent years in rooms where he was the only architect at a startup, at an engineering firm, and that position, being slightly outside the unexpected profile, turned out to be his edge. It gave him a voice, it let him translate, and now he's back inside a firm using that same outsider's clarity to solve problems that people closest to them can barely see anymore. And his push to get elevated to the College of Fellows wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a direct argument that technologists, computational designers, CIOs, and digital practice leaders also belong in that conversation. They've earned a seat, and people like Neil Katz and Charlie are examples that it's starting to change. As usual, there's an extensive amount of additional information, links, and all kinds of good stuff in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You can find them directly in your podcast app if you are a supporter of TRXL Plus, and if you're a free member, you can find them at the website, which is trxl.co. So, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Charlie Portelli. Charlie, great to have you on the show. How long has it been? A couple months? A few months since we saw each other in New York at the AEC Tech Conference, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, last winter. Yeah.
Great to catch up, first of all. And there's some new credentials that you've appended to your last name, at least one letter. And we can talk a little bit about that. And why don't you first just give us kind of the history of your time in AEC Tech?
Yeah, sure. No, totally. I've always been more kind of like on the digital side of things, even from like first semester in undergrad. There was 4 of us that had animations right off the bat.
What tools were you using? Do you want to date yourself? Do you want to give us a year?
Totally. It was AutoCAD, I think like 14, and 3D Studio Max version 3 or version 4, something like that.
Okay, I'm older than you. It's official.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not going to do the gray hair count, but yeah.
I have a lot of them, yeah. You're looking pretty spry there, young man.
Yeah, it's like I keep everything dim around here, so.
He operates in the shadows, yes.
Yeah, but, you know, for very, very early on, I was always kind of heavy-handed on the digital side and just rendering and modeling. And even that first semester, you know, building models in AutoCAD and taking them in 3D Studio Max. And I remember there was a section tool that you move the section plane and you cut a section, you get the line work, you bring it back into AutoCAD to continue to detail and everything. And that was in 2000, right? So I just sort of naturally gravitated that way. Renderings, animations. One semester, I presented nothing but renderings, and my professor sort of let me do it. And everyone in the studio hated me because it always looked like my project was more fleshed out than it was. And I think it kind of was, but
More
I was able to
dedicated.
like make it work. And I also had like really good physical models to go with it, right? So like the models, like not only do I make things digitally, but I also make things physically. And I think they both fed each other that way. So I was undergrad and yeah, drafting. I was really fast at drafting. I was really fast at modeling, pretty decent at rendering. I wasn't the best, but I was pretty good. And then I worked for a year and I was like, this is not for me. This is like not what I thought architecture was. So then I went back to grad school and that's when I learned all the parametric modeling and insights into different ways of modeling and, that sort of thing. And got a peek under the hood about interactive environments, physical computing. And that was pretty cool. There was like
What
a
does that mean?
cohort.
I want to do a digression here. What does that mean? Peeking under the hood and yeah, give us a.
So basically, we would, back in the days, you just model something in AutoCAD or 3D Studio Max, and 3D Studio Max had a little bit of a history to certain elements, so you can kind of roll back and roll forward. But the idea of with parametric modeling, back in the days, we were learning CATIA and SolidWorks, so you get the feature tree, and you can kind of like go back and forth in the tree. You can kind of insert, not always, but sometimes roll back, insert things, and kind of continue to build off of that. But then we learned how to get into the SDK of CATIA and how to code in CATIA, which was, it was a VBA back then. And that was, a slog. But back in the days, that was sort of, an eye opener of like, oh, wait, you could actually do things that and make features that don't exist in the application. And
Make
one of
your
them,
tools do what you want them to do. Yeah.
exactly right. So one of the ones that was like most obvious is like taking a point on a line, constraining it to the line, and having it a certain distance from the edge. Like that didn't exist as like a basic feature in CATIA. And I'm like, why doesn't this? So you just kind of like coded it and made your way. And ironically, we'll jump a little bit. I was messing around in Fusion a few months ago and I wanted to do the exact same thing for something else and it doesn't exist. I was like, why? Why can't I just put a point from a certain distance? Anyway.
Yeah. Right. One of the first Grasshopper things I ever did was build like my own curtain wall tool, and it's totally based on something like that, right? It's like offset a point from the end at whatever distance, and I can change that distance because I could attach it to a slider. I could put in some numerical entry, whatever I wanted, to then define like the bounds of a rectangle that become a mullion, for example, right? And yeah, so any orientation that this line gets moved around in, it just stays constrained to the line. And it's when you start to see things like that, when you're a tool builder, right? When you're making tools, because there's no curtain wall tool in Rhino, right? So I'm building my own, but in Rhino, I want to just draw a line and then I want to get a curtain wall out of it. It's like, oh, okay, you start to like dissect the logic of all that. And it's like, oh, this is eye-opening. And then you go somewhere where it doesn't exist and you're like, what am I supposed to do here?
Exactly. Yeah, no, totally. Like you almost, and I kind of said this to the Autodesk folks many years ago. It's like you kind of almost have to like think slower to move faster, because you can like dissect all those different sort of moments. And like, especially I like most of my career, I've spent building curved buildings. So as you're like pulling those points along the line, if that curve suddenly it has an inflection point, now the plane is rotated the other way.
Flipped, yeah.
And all your mullions are now pointing in the opposite direction. So you have to kind of, track that and know when to flip it and so on. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So that was grad school. And then from grad school, we also learned generative components too, kind of like dug deep into that. And I started using that actually professionally, because after grad school, I went to work at KPF for just shy of a decade. Building the group, leading it, recession, came back from the recession, and continued and so on. So that was fun. Worked on a lot of projects, mostly skyscrapers, some airports. I worked on a line of chairs with Bill Pedersen. That was kind of fun.
Nice.
He had these like free form curves that one of our colleagues, he was kind of a senior designer that always worked with Bill. He would take those freeform curves and then model them in 3D. And I remember one day they came to me and they said, we've talked to a lot of fabricators and they all said, this is impossible to build. And I was like, all right, let's take a look at it. So they were looking at the machine, the fabrication machine, and the geometry and everything. So I got on the call with the folks that use the fabrication machine, and they helped me understand.
Imagine that. Like just that insight right there. That you don't see that very often, right? It's like, well, let's get a contractor on the line, let's get a fabricator on the line, let's get a machine operator on the line, and like let's talk through what they need to see on their end so that we can make that thing.
Totally. And we got into what the G code. It used what's called LRA code, so it's kind of like a lower level G code for that specific machine. And we basically were able to dissect what all the different parameters were for each line of code. And I was like, all right, cool. I could do this. So then I was able to rationalize the freeform curve into arcs, by arcs.
And what tool are you using to do all this? Is this Grasshopper?
That was Grasshopper at that point,
okay.
Yeah. And some coding in the background, some C# in the background. So rationalize it into arcs, and with some minor deviations here and there, of course, from the freeform curve. And then take that and generate the LRA code that was sent to them in a text file, and then they can simulate it. It was wild because the entire machine moves around in so many different ways as it spews out this rod, and there's a head at the end that bends it. But it was cool because we went to the fabricator shop, and I still remember this. It's Kiwanis, Indiana, population 600. And I'm convinced they all work at this one factory.
Yeah, probably true.
There was one bar that we could order lunch from. So we went there. It was me, Bill Pedersen, Andrew Clare, and this other guy, Bill Shea. Bill Shea was a furniture consultant. So we land in Chicago and we drive for 2 hours. We had to stay in the neighboring town because there was no hotel in Kiwanis. The next morning we went to Kiwanis, and it was, the design team, the fabricator, the supplier of the metal coil, because it was a specific hardened steel, because since it was so thin, it needed to be had a certain yield strength, and the makers of the machine, the fabrication machine. So like all parties there.
Awesome.
And we're trying to flesh this out. And that doesn't happen in our industry, right? So I still hold that as one of the highlights of my career, that line of chairs.
And so before you did all this, they said it's impossible.
Yeah.
What was the outcome of this meeting and the work that you did?
Fleshing out further, sort of like the ins and outs, the limitations, what we can do, what we can't do. Because operating with CNC equipment, you can easily damage the equipment if you have the wrong code. But there's a simulation component to it, so they were able to simulate it. And we found out that we had to run some of the arcs backwards because they would bend in on the machine. Because it basically loops on itself. If you take like a rubber band and like twist it between your fingers, how it kind of loops. That's basically it. The chairs are called loop-de-loop. So yeah, we kind of like fleshed out the ins and outs and everything, and then came back to New York, and there was more, headaches and things like that. But we were able to get it to work to a certain degree. They did run into some limitations. And that's sort of when I kind of got pulled. Once we got over a milestone, I got pulled off that project to do other things. And then, they made a couple of prototypes from that. And then they just kind of put it on pause. I think they ended up, we even talked about like the jig that we would have to make in order to test for repeatability and all that too while we were in that meeting. I remember that. But then they ended up putting on hold for a little bit. And I think they went, because they made some design changes, and I think they ended up going to a different fabricator yet again, up in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. And that was sort of the last of my involvement on that one.
But it's interesting, like that feedback loop, right? That gets unearthed. I imagine there was growth on both sides of the table there, the design side, but also the fabrication side, where it's like, oh, you got farther than we thought you could get, right? And it also, knowing the constraints of the machines and the material science and all those things, it informs the design process as well. It's like, just because you can sketch it and you can think about this idea in 3D doesn't mean the machine can actually do that thing, and therefore we need to know what those constraints are. And that by doing that engagement, both sides got better, I would assume,
Oh,
through that
totally.
process.
Without a doubt. The machine was able to do two types of bends. One's called the hard bend, and the hard bend is, just imagine taking something and wrapping it around something, right? That's a hard bend. Like the thing you're wrapping around does not move. You're just bending it.
Like
And
a tube bender would work in a steel shop, right? It's like a jig. You've got these things and you bend it around it and it forces it into the shape that you want it
correct.
to be in.
Yeah. Then the other bend is called the generative bend, and it had a series of rollers. But, on one side you had rollers, and the other side you had the hard bend, right? So the tool can change.
It's more dynamic, yeah. It's like adjustable, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So which is kind of interesting. And then the entire assembly can rotate on itself. So as the material's coming out, if you need to bend up, you can bend up. If you need to bend down, the entire thing turns around and it bends down. So that was kind of interesting in itself. And we got to a point where it was this material science side of things, because the tubes were so small in diameter, because they were meant to be really kind of elegant and sleek. They had to be a certain type of yield strength, which was a high yield strength. And at that high yield strength, the machine was not strong enough to push the material through the tight radii. So we had to, the feedback loop of like, all right, we had to go back and relax some of the radii,
Yeah.
so that the machine can actually push the steel through to make the bends and everything. So it was that kind of like circular,
Yeah.
which was kind of interesting.
Just the connection to the physical manifestation that was ultimately going to come out of this project
Yeah.
doesn't happen enough in this industry, does it? I mean,
No.
Okay. Just
I don't
fair.
believe it does.
Just checking me right there.
If it does, then I'm not in that part of the industry for some reason. But yeah, there's only like two projects where that I've worked on, where we were able to go from the model that we produced directly into the fabrication process.
Yeah.
And not like saying, oh, we're just going to copy paste it. No, they actually opened and used the model, right? So,
I mean, the bridge to that is typically a specialty consultant, right? Who works in, maybe they're a metal framing consultant, maybe they're a specialty metals, maybe they're, there's lots of examples of that, where it's like they're the bridge of, okay, we've solved a lot of problems in this specific area before, and that's helpful. But usually it's solved with people instead of that direct relationship with the product manufacturer or the fabricator or whatever it is, because, I mean, that's over there, and we're not going to take the time to go over there. We'd rather send an email, or we'd rather have them come to us because, there's a lot to do, etc.
Yeah, I don't know why we are so antisocial these days. I just don't get it.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, we did a little digression there on a cool project, but it sounds like throughout this time you're kind of building up lots of different chops when it comes to software and workflows and things like that. Where did you go from KPF?
Yeah. So after that, Flux came around, and I ended up joining Flux. They kind of said, hey, we were kind of beta testing their integrations, and
Talk about what Flux is, because there's going to be a lot of people who are like, what's Flux? Because they missed that whole part, or they came after it. I mean, there's going to be those, of course, who know exactly what Flux is.
At this point, it's almost a decade now.
Yeah.
Decade ago. So Flux was this startup that spun out of Google X. Google X is sort of this incubator where the idea is that whatever comes out of it has sort of like a 10x impact on the industry. Originally, it was Flux.
Whatever
Metro.
industry, right? Like, it's not specific to AEC, right? It's Google.
Correct.
We're talking about Google here, right? So this is kind of like their,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say moonshot category, right? But this 10x is a big multiplier.
It's a big multiplier, right? They never told us that 10x was related to money, but I'm sure there was like a money thing underneath it.
That's a VC number. Yeah.
Exactly, right.
For sure.
So originally it was meant to be this tool where you type in an address and you get automatic zoning and massing. And they realized that they couldn't move data around so easily. And then it sort of pivoted a little bit, and then it pivoted yet again. And the point that we started to engage was, or they started to engage us, was when it was basically a suite of interoperability tools. So
Yeah, I was going to say, if you could wrap it up into one word, that was the word, right? Interoperability.
Exactly right. So imagine have a piece of native geometry in Rhino, and you want that natively in Revit, not file import, file export, none of that stuff. Like, it's a native sphere in one application, it becomes a native sphere in the other application. You can edit it just as if you drew it there. So in parallel, I had something similar in the KPF days, not as robust, but it was enough for what we needed to do, facades and curtain walls and that sort of thing. So one day they said, if we were to stop this, development on Flux, like, how would this affect you? And my response was like, not at all. Because, we have our own thing and it's running. So then shortly after, they emailed me and they're like, hey, do you want to come work with us?
Like, you gave them enough pushback to make them notice.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, shots fired.
And I was like, yeah, I was being honest. I was like, I'm not here to hurt anyone's feelings, but, I was like, yeah, it wouldn't affect me because I was already moving geometry from Rhino, Grasshopper, Dynamo, Revit, and Unity and Excel. Like, I was able to export an entire Revit model with all the data into a JSON format, and I could bring it into Rhino, click on the thing in Rhino, and I had an attributes panel, and you could talk to Scott Davidson and Brian Gillespie at McNeil. And back in 2015, I was at their office. I was like, I want you to do attributes. I want you to do attributes. And they're like, what does that mean? And I explained everything, and I showed them what I had done. But basically, you can click on the thing in Rhino, and you could see all the data there. And then you could take it, and you could bring it in the same JSON format into Unity, build your scene, click on the object, and see all the attributes there. Like, it could be done. So then Flux was like, hey,
Excel was your BIM tool. I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, the thing, so
everything.
At first I was doing it with Excel, and then I was like, screw this, I need something even lighter and faster. So then I was doing it with JSON. But since I had an Excel integration, I was like, oh, what if you write data to Excel? So I was like, sure, right? Like, just so I kept that as at first it was in between, but then it just became another endpoint, really. But yeah, so I toyed around with the idea of joining a startup for a while, Flux specifically. I was like, yeah, do I do this? Do I not do this? What the hell do I know? Like, these people are coming from like Google and DreamWorks and Autodesk and Trimble and, Stanford and whatnot. And I was like, well, what the hell do I know? So I said, screw it, let me do it. So I went, it's kind of like graduating high school and going to college. Like,
it's not a bad place to be, right, Charlie? It's like I'm totally willing to not be the smartest person in the room. Like the people that you just listed, right? You would just be like, whoa, fertile ground, right? I mean, this is going to be a place for growth.
Totally. And I wanted to challenge myself because back then, not that I was bored at work, it was just that I knew where I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew architecture firms at the time would not go in that direction. There needed to be more kind of software skills, more coding skills. They would never license out a geometry platform, that's agnostic of, a piece of software, right? So to have a geometry kernel under the hood so that you can operate on and all this stuff. So I was like, let me do this. And so I took a deep dive, and at first I was like, what the hell did I do?
Imposter syndrome.
I remember having dinner one time. We were working late, and the people were talking around the table. They were talking about how possible is it to actually do time travel, and they were getting into the physics behind it. And I was quiet. I was like, I have.
You're like, no, they've really thought about this, man. Like, seriously.
They did. I was like, geez, man, we are smart. So that was sort of that. But like very quickly, I also kind of realized I was the only architect there. There was another guy he had a background in engineering, like structural engineering, but I was the only architect there. And so very quickly I had a voice because I was able to hear what our users were saying because I speak architecture, and I was able to translate it to the software engineers.
Yeah.
And that became valuable.
This episode is made possible with support from Avail. Is your firm managing architectural, landscape, interiors, and engineering content? Avail's all-in-one content management solution stretches across all disciplines, file types, and content locations so production teams can find everything they need all in one place. Thanks to Avail's desktop application and Revit, AutoCAD, and Civil 3D plugins, teams can consistently find and reuse all types of content from specifications and calculations to 3D models and plans. As a result, standards-compliant models and drawings are easier to create, the documentation process is less chaotic, new hires are easier to onboard, and projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. Visit getavail.com to request a demo. That's GETAVAIL.com to request a demo. My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. And I would imagine, I mean, this is kind of a selfish question here because this is something I'm looking for confirmation bias, I guess, but it's like putting an architect in a room full of not architects immediately, like the light of you sitting in that room is like you think differently than you've been trained to think differently and problem solve differently than almost everybody else in that room, like even a structural engineer for sure, right? It's just you're applying design thinking because it's ingrained in you to do so versus, very linear thinking. I would just, quickly generalize it as, but you're a different kind of animal in that kind of environment.
Yeah, no, totally, without a doubt. And yeah, so that design thing is something that we all went to school through, and you kind of like it gets instilled in you over and over again, and you sort of mature at it by working on projects and sort of seeing designs through, coming up with this concept and executing. But the programmatic side of thing is I don't want to generalize, but it is somewhat linear in a sense, right? You have a task, you break down the task into smaller tasks. You have your epics and your sprints, and these sprints build up, and then they turn into features and so on. But like prioritizing them, distilling them, being able to take different epics or features or sprints or whatever and to kind of categorize them in a way so that as it comes through the pipeline, you're actually either working on multiple things that feed into, multiple things, or you're working on something that in the near term feeds these little things, but in the long term, you're building towards something else. So you're planning, for, attributes integrations or other stuff, right? So I became the product manager at Flux within like the first six or so months. And I had about 15 software engineers that I was kind of responsible for.
How did that happen? Is that because of the way that you, like this orchestration layer and thinking that you had command over with just your background?
I wouldn't maybe use the word command, but more understanding. Yeah. And it's funny because when they interview, I never went through a software interview. It was like a full day worth of interviews. So, I went through that whole process, and then many months later, I was grabbing the beers with, some of the guys, and I was talking about the interview and everything. And they're like, yeah, you were alluding to what we wanted to hear, but you just didn't have the right terminology because you weren't trained as a software engineer. So I was answering the questions in a way that they knew sort of how I would dissect problems and how I would approach them. I just didn't know like the actual terminology, right? Like
plus then you're an inside like resource of talking to a customer, but it's easy because you're right there. You get to that I imagine is very valuable as well.
Oh yeah, no, totally, yeah. So that's sort of how it came about. It sort of just like proved itself that between bridging the two and all. So I was good, and I had a lot of fun. there were ups and downs, just like any job. So that lasted about 2 years before they got sort of restructured and a bunch of other stuff, and then they went into scan to BIM, and I was like, all right, this is sort of not my thing. So we just mutually parted ways, and so that was 2 years, and then I went to Thornton Tomasetti's core studio.
Okay.
I'd known those guys for forever and a day, since before they actually started. I went to school with Jonathan Schumacher, who was at TT while I was at KPF. Many of the folks there, I sat in on their reviews or something or other, right? So there was always sort of like a close relationship because we went to the same grad school, different years apart and so on. And I knew Rob Otani for a long time. I joke around. I've known him longer than I've known my wife. So, so once, I told him that I parted ways and everything, and he's like, "Oh, we have this startup that we launched. It's called Konstru. Do you want to, help it out and everything?" So like, yeah, sure, why not? So I joined TT Core Studio. About 75% of my time was Konstru. It was a structural interoperability application. So having done this on the architecture side, I was like, oh, structure should be easy, right? It is and isn't, in that, most of it is like linear members and profiles and all that. So that's the easy part. The hard part is that there's so many different structural engineering applications. And like, whether you're doing seismic or lateral or bay sizing or beam calculations or column calculation or something, there's a piece of software for every single thing.
Mm.
Architects complain that they have too many applications. Man, the engineering world is way more complex and way more data heavy too, because then you get like analysis results of like, different moments and different shears and different, I guess in architecture world, we'll call them design options, but in engineering world, they have something else, load factor combinations. That's what it is. So if you get this load and that load and that load and that load, you analyze that and you get this. But if you get this load and that load and the other load, and you get this and this and that and the other thing. And I was like, wow, this is like options on top of options on top of options. Yeah. It's nuts.
It's like generative design.
It is. It's like generative design almost like gone wrong in a way. It's like, can't we find a better way?
Wait, you just described generative design. Wait.
Yeah. Oh, man, yeah. That's
so describe what Konstru ended up being when you were, through that project, but when you were done with it too.
Or
was it ever done? Software's never done. Sorry.
The software's never done now.
Right.
It's still running to my understanding. Over those 4.5 years, we took a hard look at the back end, restructured the database a little bit, updated some of the frameworks, the UI framework, the front end framework, upgraded some of the back end frameworks like Node and Express and all that other stuff. We simplified the application a little bit. I can very easily get confused, so I like to do I want a simple way of doing something, and I want one way of doing it. I don't need to. There's that phrase of like 1,000 ways to skin a cat. I want one. Give me the one way so that like I know I push this button and this is how it happens. And not like there's another button that does the exact same thing under 7 different interfaces somewhere else.
How many different ways to hide an element in Revit? There's like 53 ways or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't, why? I don't get it. So we did a lot of that. And then within, then I kind of took it over, Jonathan Schumacher at the time was sort of the co-lead for Konstru. He ended up leaving, so I inherited this thing. So there's a lot of restructuring that happened there, and took over the finances and took over a bunch of stuff and like got everything really consolidated and settled. and, started to push it forward as a product manager and, webinars and trainings and that sort of stuff. And, getting people onboarded, figuring out bugs, trying to flesh them out. And one year, I think it was one of the first years, we were actually able to break even, which for a startup is, not a common thing very early on.
So tell me how that works, like monetarily with, like, what was the business model for Konstru for you to be able to make that kind of a comment and claim?
Yeah, it was a subscription-based model, right? And it was, I can't remember the dollar amounts, but it was a user would pay a certain amount per model. So if you had, let's say you were working on 5 projects, 2 hospital projects, an interior renovation, and so on, right? Each one of those models would be technically a project in Konstru. So for each of those projects, it was a certain dollar amount a month, right? And that allowed you to do all the translations back and forth and all the updates and all the iterations and move your structure around,
And what was it providing back to you? Was it doing calcs? Was it? Because I remember, I don't think I ever looked at Konstru. I remember looking at Asterisk, which is another, web-based application that was great for an architect to throw something over the digital wall and get back an idea. But Konstru is, you're solving professional kind of risk and liability problems for engineers, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it was definitely for the structural engineering side of things. By no means, very quickly I realized by no means was it meant for the architect's world. So you can take your structural members from any application and bring them into any application, run your analysis with all your load combinations and everything, and bring that all back to Konstru, right? So Konstru became sort of like the central repository. And then within Konstru, there were some tools to do some model fixing. Like, for example, in an analytical application, columns and beams need to meet at a node. But when you model these things in, let's say Revit or whatever, right, the columns and the beams.
It's got to look right. Who cares about those nodes?
Exactly, right? And then you go to Tekla and, the splice connection is not where the floor slab happens. It happens, somewhere else, right? The column splice. So all of those things need to be sort of adjusted accordingly to go from one application to another. Otherwise, your analysis
some kind of resolution there, right? I mean, yeah.
Exactly. So there was things like that. There were some analytics in terms of like tracking changes, change tracking, what changed in your model over, the different sort of commits that you did. So that was kind of interesting. So there were some nice moments there. So it was a subscription-based model. We tracked the revenue. Our expenses had gone down because at that point there was just me. So there wasn't much, and there wasn't much overhead. Marketing, back of house, development, product, all of that stuff came like through me. By no means was I good at all of it, but I had a spreadsheet that I was tracking all our revenue, all of our expenses, and all this other stuff, right? So everything balanced out. And for 1 year, a couple of months we were, in a little bit in the red, a couple of months we were a little bit in the black, but for 1 year we kind of balanced out. We kind of broke even, which was, surprising. I mean, it's not like we were making a lot of money either.
Were you an employee of Konstru or an employee of Core Studio at TT?
So I was an employee of Core Studio, TT, and then there was sort of like a bill back because I needed health insurance and, those important things, right?
Yeah.
And TT had already had that health insurance structure and everything. So they just billed it back to Konstru.
So let me just kind of restate what's going on here for those who are not, understanding this fully. Thornton Tomasetti has what started out as, I think, Advanced Modeling Group, turned into Core Studio, right? Which is what do you classify that as? Like it's not a startup. It's a group within the company that does kind of R&D advanced stuff for TT. And a project was born in there, Konstru, am I right so far?
Yep.
And then it was spun off into its own startup, which somehow, weirdly worked its way with back billing so that you could get health insurance. But I like, just for the simplification of the explanation, right? It's its own thing now.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
And it's a product with its own dedicated team that so TT kind of has this vision of incubating startups from within, the company, Core Studio included, to go out and become their own entities. And I just wanted to kind of re-describe that because, I mean, there's many layers to this, but at the same time, it's visionary, it's forward thinking. It's like we're looking for other revenue streams. We're looking to prove this stuff, because what you're not doing is developing this technology and then only using it internally. You're basically saying Konstru is something that we're putting out into the industry, into the market, and saying, can this survive? Can it thrive? Will it tank? Like, whatever. It's a bet. And like you're saying, we got to the point, which is not common in the software industry. Like, we were breaking even. We were even making a little bit of money. Yeah. I mean, all of that. I just wanted to say all that because it's a really cool model, and it's really cool that Thornton Tomasetti does this. There aren't that many other companies that are doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, no, totally. And it helps out, Nick, to add more clarity to that too, in that once Konstru got rolled out as its own separate entity, it had a separate accountant. It was external, separate legal that was external. Everything was external. All finances, all that stuff they were completely split, to a point where TT was even paying to use Konstru. There was a contract there.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. Super, interesting. I mean, I can understand, like, legally why they even probably had to do that, because it's like, no, really, this is a thing that because you have to go through all of the steps for that to actually work. But wow, I mean, it's so cool.
Yeah, no, totally. And I had my own email account and everything, and like databases, all this stuff, everything was separated from what Core Studio does and everything. And at that time, talk about TT rolling out startups. They had rolled out 4 startups. Konstru was one of them. There was another one called Pumpkin Mounts, another one called PZ Flex, but then it got renamed to something else. And I forgot what the 4th one was. One of them was these mass tune dampers for skyscrapers. I think it was like something that came out of NASA actually, and they had collaborated with, I don't know the full story there, but essentially the product would be able to create a mass tune damper that's smaller than modern day mass tune dampers. There's either the slosh tank or the big metal ball or whatnot. This was able to be smaller and yet produce the same amount of dampening, right? That was the tune damper. The PZ Flex thing, I forgot what it was called. Not On Shape, In Scale. No, can't remember. It got renamed, and Google invested in it, and a couple others. And it was sort of like the equivalent of a FEA solver, but it was way faster than anything that was on the market. And they were using it Google was interested in it for some 5G calculations. I didn't fully grasp what that meant. And then it iterated a couple of times, and that one end up getting acquired by Ansys, actually. Yeah, they acquired it because it could do, I forgot the name of the process too. It could do solving way faster than many of the solvers that existed. And ironically, it was written way back in the days. I don't want to misspeak, but I want to say that like at one point there was like some Fortran code in there, using like some really complex matrices or something like that. And they had like the research papers, which they like had proven all the calculations, and they had benchmark tests and all this other stuff. So, TT was kind of innovative in that. Like, and not all of TT did this either. It was they started this. Not all the partners were involved. It was whoever wanted to be involved, they got involved, and they called it Twin, TTWIN, Thornton, Tomasetti, Weilinger, Innovation, something. I can't remember what the acronym stood for, but it was whoever felt comfortable. You joined this twin company, you put in some funds, and that becomes the seed for these startups to roll out.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, sounds good. I did that for about 4.5 years. So yeah, there was 4 startups there, and in the process, a colleague of ours, he rolled out another startup called T2D2. It was using machine learning to detect facade inspections, to detect cracks and spalls and facade defects. So, the local law 11, which is, I think, gotten renamed to FISP, facade inspection, something or other. In New York, every 5 years, buildings of a certain height or higher need to go through a facade inspection. And what that usually entails is a sidewalk scaffolding and either a drop scaffolding or someone belaying off the side of the building. And there's a visual component to it, and there's like a physical component where they tap with a hammer. And others. I'm also generalizing.
Is this the drone? Do they use drones now for this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So this
and
used
like computer
drone.
vision for the cracks and yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So the drone would fly a pattern over the facade and take a bunch of photos and video, and using machine learning, it would identify where there were issues, right? If there were, if there weren't, and it was
new issues versus the last time, right? You could do
exactly right comparisons.
Yeah.
Because it reduced the cost to do the inspections, right? So therefore you could do them more frequently, and you can track, what's changing over time, right?
Do building owners want this? I mean, on some level, yes, I could imagine it's like, well, yeah, I want to know what's going on. And because the 5-year enforce thing, it's like, oh, we got to go through this process again. We got to order scaffolding. We got to pay all this money to have. So I could imagine that it was probably well received by owners of buildings to do something that was easier and more proactive potentially.
It was definitely. There were other hurdles. Some of the hurdles were getting clearance to fly drones in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and we were always researching, even though I wasn't working on that, I was kind of interested myself. And I'm not a drone person, but I want to understand this problem. So they were able to get around it. But what this also allowed them to do is not just facades, but also bridges. Setting up a scaffolding for a building is one thing. Setting up a scaffolding for a bridge, totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were able to get some good contracts for some like concrete bridge work and stuff like that. So, TT is I still have a soft spot in my heart for them.
Sure.
And KPF too. Yeah. So they're good. But in the end, after 4.5 years, I was like, I like the work and, I like the people, but there's only so much I can get excited about shears and moments and forces and stuff. It's just,
I'm an architect at heart, guys. Sorry.
That's exactly it. So one day I walked into Rob's office and I just said,
Closed the door behind you, said Rob.
Yeah, I'm thinking about going back into architecture. And his first words was like, I get it. He's like, I'll miss you, but I get it. Right. And I was like, architecture is my first language, but technology's in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
So the tech side is easy, sort of, but I just can't get motivated about, and to see these engineers get really excited about some of the problems they were solving and everything. And you look at that and you look at that excitement and you're like, I want to try to understand. It's kind of like watching a sport that you don't understand and you see everyone else having a good time. Like, I want to understand that more. I want to get into it more. But I just couldn't. It just wasn't a sport for me. Yeah.
Makes sense. So where did you end up going to from there?
So that's where I ended up now. I'm working up at Perkins&Will. So I've been here about 3.5 years, give or take. They like me, they let me in, they pay me, or at least they say they like me. So
barely, yeah, barely. Okay, so you're back in the architecture world, and I'm really curious. Like, you've gained a ton of experience while you've been gone on your architecture sabbatical, working at startups and engineering firms, and learning how to become a product manager, right? So there's still a huge divide, right, with like architecture, design, project management, process, which is really process management, right? And there's internal, external processes, and a project could be thought of as a startup, because every project starts up with a new team and a new location, and we've heard these analogies before too, right? But then there's like this idea of like owning a product. And then there's like this idea of a project in the architecture world, and those two things aren't the same thing, right? They're not.
No.
We don't think about in architecture like product management, and like you were saying, there's all these different areas that you are responsible for with the product, with Konstru, for example, right? And Flux before that. And then it's different. Like, there's this real division of, ownership. Like, there's design ownership, there's project management, there's specifications, there's BIM, there's all that, there's like the principals who are doing client relationship and stuff like that. And then you get to actually construction and construction administration and contracts and all that stuff. And it's just very different, I assume. So I would love to kind of, maybe talk a little bit about that in kind of how does that layer into coming back to architecture and the kinds of problems you're solving for a large enterprise?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. There's always that sort of question of like product versus project, right? And there are similarities, and I could see why people would think that they're, interchangeable. And, sometimes you just kind of like let it slide off the cuff, like, sure, why not? Yeah. But you're
like, I don't want to have this discussion again. I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Go ahead and think whatever you want.
and another beer before I keep going, right? But no, there's, some of the processes from one are adaptable for another. And I really think that some of the processes from product management should be considered for project management, I think. Being able to track, productivity and assign tasks and hold people accountable without micromanaging and all that other stuff. I think there's, especially now in the days where we're like, semi-remote, hybrid-ish, I think there's an opportunity there for management to kind of be rethought. But in the end, products, it's a continuous cycle, right? There's sort of really no end. Whereas with a project, there's an end, right, in sight, and you hit these major milestones, and you have to throw stuff over the fence, and you make your way there. But with the product, you're engaging, especially on the product management side. From my perspective, I'm biased now, right? You talk to the end users, you see their sort of pain points. You start to dig into it to try to make sure you understand it correctly. Having domain knowledge helps a lot there. And then once you take that, you can start to pull it apart and categorize it and understand. We used to do these charts. I forgot the name of them, but effort versus value, right? How much effort is this going to take, and how much value will this bring? Low effort, high value. You work on those right away, right? You get people excited. People that get excited pay more. People that pay more bring in revenue. Revenue helps you build in, the features that, require more effort and yet bring in still high value and so on. So it's this sort of cycle, but you also kind of make sure that your features aren't sort of like so like scattered, right? Like, because you're like, oh, we have this one feature, you can do something, but we haven't built out the 3 other features that need to go with it. For example, like it doesn't make sense. You sort of have to plan that path. And I really enjoyed that on the product management side, because then I would get into like the SDKs of the applications, and when I would write sort of the user stories and everything of how this needed to flesh out, I would even go into the, like I said, the SDKs and like get the documentation and say, this is what you need to hit. This is where you would store the data. This is the piece. This is the endpoint that you need to get this piece of data out. This is where it needs to go, and so on. So I'd really get detailed into it because I knew the modeling applications fairly well. I can navigate those. But yeah, there's this like continuous cycle, because once it gets developed, then you have to go through testing. And once you get through testing, then you go back to those same users and say, hey, so we think we have something, you want to test it. And they test it, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you miss a little bit, so you have to go back. But by going back and including them in that process, you now have people that are invested in a good way, right? In the sense that like their voice has been heard. They're now able to do something that they wished they could have done, and now they can do it, right? Whereas with a project, it's sort of, a project is like a storyline. It's a continuous story.
Yeah.
So there's
I was going to say, like, the closest analog to that in the architectural process is like user group meetings that go on throughout the design process, and that the communication device for that to happen is plans and renderings, and maybe it's VR, maybe it's real-time kind of walkthroughs. I don't know, but it's not like you're designing. If you use the analogy of the building is going to be a tool that they're going to use, like there's not a lot of physical prototyping that goes on.
Yeah.
There is in some industries, maybe retail. I mean, Apple's pretty famous for this, building an Apple store inside of a warehouse way before and testing everything to the nth degree before they ever committed to building their first store. But that's rare, right? And so it's kind of interesting to think about, like, how do you build ownership through the architectural design process? It's through being heard and all those things in meetings, around tables, looking at paper or screens, right? Yeah. And it's not hands-on in the same way that it is maybe with making tools for people through software.
Yeah, the mock-ups are probably what come close, right? You do interior mock-ups, you could do exterior mock-ups, but even that, they're,
it's not really spatial usually, right? It's like it's a section of a wall. We're going to go to a furniture showroom. We're going to, things like that.
Yeah. And you can't get everyone involved in that process, right? You can't get the end users involved in a process or anything like that, right? So it is a very selective few that you get to engage, and so on. So it's, there's definitely differences there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we try to have a little bit of a product thinking. We hear the architects, we hear their problems. We work on some of those, and then we try to solve them, and we get back to them. But ideas come from all over the place within Perkins&Will. Some of them come from leadership. They see trends in the industry. What are their clients saying? What do they see their peers, at other leaders in other firms saying? And they come back to us and say, well, we need to do this, or we need to do that. Or they see industry trends, this sector is dwindling because tariffs are too high. So this sector is picking up, like the conversion from the repositioning from office to residential, right? That was a sector that picked up for a little bit. I haven't heard much of it lately in the past few months, but projects take for a long time to execute. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of those happening, right? The Flatiron building is one of them, right? It's being converted to residential as we speak.
Well, I'm curious, like, when you're hearing things from leadership in this example, the tariff thing makes sense to me as far as like, oh, you may not have heard of that. Like, you're building tools, you're keeping your eye on the technology landscape, but I'm curious, how many times do they come to you with something that you have not heard of? I mean, are you guys in sync with most of the stuff you're hearing? I mean, are you being you've got to be doing research all the time and saying, like, what's coming at us, what's going on in the industry, what's going on outside of the industry, how it could apply to us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, my ears and eyes are always open. Whether you call it research or not, I read the news for better or for worse. When I go to industry events and I meet my peers, especially peers that are sort of in like adjacent sectors, the construction space or the facade space or engineering space, I always ask, like, so do you see things slowing down, or the real estate space? Like, what are you seeing, right? Like, interest rates haven't moved, so people at some point are going to get comfortable with those interest rates. So the construction loans will still happen, but that's one thing that stays steady. But now the cost of materials goes up, so for you're already paying a higher interest rate. And now your buying potential with that money is actually dropped more because everything else increased. And now with gas prices, to be determined, I can only expect prices to go higher, right? Because everything is transported one way or another, right? Using a truck. So yeah, just keeping an eye on the pulse. So never is it, when leadership comes with sort of a request or something, never is it sort of out of the blue, and they usually come with, their insights of where they're seeing it, so they'll come with a little bit of the backstory or the side story to that scenario.
And you have to have a good relationship with them then, right? Like, for that to be a safe environment to have ideas and to, I think a lot of times when it's leadership, like, there doesn't need to be a safe environment. It's like, here's what I see and here's what you're going to do, kind of a thing. But I would imagine to encourage dialogue around potential and all of those kinds of things, that you guys have to have a good relationship.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Yeah. And I don't hesitate in questioning something that I might have doubts in, and my doubts might be just, my lack of knowledge of that specific topic. So I'll ask,
Sure.
like, how does this work, and why is it this way and not this way? Like, what's the scenario there? So, and they'll explain it and they'll go through it, which is good. So it's, but I don't doubt it just because I don't think it's right. I'll doubt it because I don't fully understand it. Right?
Yeah.
So it's less defensive that way. And, we go through it, and there are times where you're like, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. Yeah, I get it. Or, I'll counter. And they're like, what? Yeah, that's actually a good idea. I never really thought of it that way. Let's look into it a little bit. But it doesn't kill the project. Usually, it just sort of steers it slightly differently, but never does it kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about how you're working nowadays with the multiple fire hoses of stuff that's shooting at us, and when you're developing tools. I mean, it sounds like that your group is really invested in developing tools for the firm to use at a large scale. I mean, that's kind of, I'm sure, like, that's the charge for your kind of a group, right?
Yeah, definitely. So there's sort of two sides of our group. So I co-lead what's called the IO group. I'm going to really sort of simplify it, but we basically do application development, as you said, right? My colleague out in Chicago, Thomas Kearns, he's a little more externally facing, meaning some of the work that he does and his side of the team, they are more for client engagement and things like that, and pursuing work, digital services and so on. And I'm more sort of the internal side. I know how projects work, I know how projects run, and that sort of thing. Doesn't mean that I don't, peek my head out the window every so often. So my side of the team, we work more for applications on the inside of the firm. How do we streamline certain things? Some of it hasn't been sexy work. We spent a few months doing some work with our spec writers. How do we initiate kickoff specification process with our spec writers and our project architects a little more smoother, so that project architects come to the table a little more with a specifier's thinking, so that the dialogue is a little more informed. It's kind of like, when you go to your annual physical, you take a check of like, did I hurt myself this year? Do I have any pains? You're like, oh wait, I remember I sprained my ankle. It comes back once in a while. Like, I go and prepared. Same thing, getting project architects to be prepared for these conversations. And that's sort of rolling, and it's in its beta right now. And so far, so good. But then there's other phases of like, so once the project has kicked off and we get to the late SD, early DD phase, how do we make sure that the documents, the construction, the drawings and the specifications are in sync with one another? There are some applications out there where you can do tagging and so on, but they don't really talk to the specifications so well. So now that we have a starting point and we have a corpus of spec sections that started with, and we have a model, we can start to pull data from the two and cross-reference it. That's sort of still in the ideation phase. We haven't started that, but we've also talked about on the construction administration side, when submittals are submitted, again, non-sexy stuff.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I want to take 30 seconds to talk about something that really matters to me. This podcast exists because I believe this industry deserves better conversations. No agenda, no corporate backing, just honest, in-depth dialogue with the people actually shaping where AEC is headed. More than 25,000 of you listen to this show, and less than 50 of you are direct supporters of what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because if this kind of independent media matters to you, if these conversations have ever changed how you think or introduced you to someone worth knowing, then the most direct way to keep it going is to become a TRXL Plus member. $12 a month, ad-free episodes, the full Leadership Edge newsletter with my deep dives and the things I don't say on the podcast, and the knowledge that you're one of the people making this possible. Head over to the website at trxl.co and click the join button. And either way, I'm really glad that you're here. Now let's get back to today's conversation. No, I love it because there's the non-sexy stuff is the stuff that's probably going to matter to a lot more people and have more positive outcomes on projects, because it's like, that's the kind of stuff that nobody should actually have to worry about and deal with, but they do, and they don't like dealing with that kind of stuff. So if you could take that off their plate by dealing with it with some kind of a tool, that would be a huge win. And like you said, it's not sexy, but it's a huge win, right?
Yeah, totally. Because every project goes through it, right? And that's if there's a error or omission in that, that's where some lawsuit would come up, right? That's probably where it's going to come up there. But yeah, like thinking about when submittals are sent, it's usually manufacturer submittals, which have tons and tons and tons of data. But from our perspective, we only need these like 10 parameters, right? Like we need to know the fire rating, we need to know this, we need to know that, we need to know that, right? So somebody has to sit through, a 5-page document to pull out these 3 or 4 parameters to make sure we got checked off our list, or make sure the model number is the right one, or so on. So that's something we haven't started that process yet either, but we've done some tests, some early tests, and we have some ideas. So specifications is one topic, and then tying that back to our business platform that we have internally. So project naming, project numbering, adding staff, like you do it in one location and it has a trickle down effect for everything else, right? For your specifications, for your BIM 360, ACC, collaboration, all that stuff. Like you don't need to be entering your name and email address and project name and project. You don't need to do it. Just do it once in one location, and we will take care of the rest in the back end, right? Setting up your Teams channel, setting up your project folder. That's something we've prototyped. We haven't fully rolled it out yet, but basically one button will do all of that for you. And again, invite everybody so no one gets left out, or I forgot to add this person, or I forgot to add this person. If a new person gets added to the project, they're added in our business platform, and all that trickles down, right? They get invited to everything, right? That's the end goal.
Removing friction at all these little places ultimately makes a huge difference, and that takes dedication from a team like yours to actually tackle those projects, but also understand those needs, where those friction points are. And so I'm curious, how do you surface those kinds of friction points? Is it just things that you just keep hearing the same complaints about, keep having to answer the same questions about through help desk, whatever, and then slowly you build up like, oh, this one keeps coming up. We should try to address that. Is there a solution?
Yeah. So some of them is just, keeping my ear to the ground. So there's the digital practice group that my colleague Nick Cameron runs, and I join their meetings. They have like weekly meetings that I join them and I listen in.
Just a fly on the wall kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the beautiful thing about sort of like virtual meetings in some instances, that I know they're talking about important stuff and it's very important to them. For me, only a small percentage of it will actually be relative. So I can listen into it. I'm not the main person in the meeting and I can continue to work, and that's totally fine. And since they're recorded, if I miss a meeting, I can actually go back to it and listen to it at 1.5 the speed, and I can catch up very quickly. But I'll start to hear patterns and trends, and so the business platform sets up the project, and then you have to talk to someone from IT to set up your teams and your project folder. And then you have to talk to someone from digital practice to set up the ACC BIM 360 thing and all that. Why? Let's condense it. The thing that we were doing is we were pulling data from our business platform, and I wanted to cross-reference it against some of our project data in BIM 360. And when I was doing that, project naming and project numbering were not the same. They were sort of all over the place. And that's when I was like, wait a minute, this isn't sustainable. So the digital practice folks were really awesome because they're in all the offices. They went in and they started a spreadsheet, and for everyone in their office, they were able to collect, this is the project on Hub and this is the project in BIM 360, whatever, right? I was like, that's great, but that's not sustainable. So let's see if we can automate this process and simplify it. So that's where that one came about. And I think value comes when you can cross-cut data from different platforms, right?
Yeah.
You can dashboard all you want in BIM 360 or in your specifications application or your business platform, whatever. But I want to understand the staffing hours that were put on this project, and I can get the area from this project, and I can get the hours of staffing from here, right? And I want to understand that for every 100,000 square feet of hospital space you need X amount of staffing hours.
One intern. No.
I know, right?
Well, so you mentioned the word value. I'm curious how. Okay, so you did you're coordinating, something that's going on in BIM 360, a project number, with something that's going on in your project hub. Those two things weren't the same. You go through this process. How do you put a value on solving a problem like that just continues to reap dividends, although no one will notice it in the future?
Well, yeah. The Brian Gillespie from McNeil, once he had a phrase. He said, "If I do my job really well, you'll never notice."
Yeah.
So hopefully I'll lean on that. The first value that I start to bring is how much hours am I saving folks from doing something really boring, right? Do you really want to sit there and add people, to BIM 360, copying over email addresses, typing in a project name and a project number? Do you really want to?
But these little baby cuts, right? People they're just so used to them that they don't notice how much time they're spending, and so there's that side of it. It's real time. It really is a drag on the system in so many ways. It's a drag on the people who have to do it. It's a drag on somebody later who doesn't understand how this system works. Why are there two different numbers in these two different places? All of those kinds of things. And then there's actually, I don't know if you guys even have to do this, but I remember back in the day, it was what's our ROI on doing these kinds of things? And it's well, that's a hard thing to quantify. So I'm curious, how do you have to quantify it? And if you do, how do you tell that story?
Yeah, I've never had to hard qualify it. I never had to come up with hard numbers, but I do come up with numbers of, oh, for every project we set up, it saves this person this much time because that's what they said. Take that multiplied by how many projects we get in a year. This is, 50% of an FTE, right? And this is 50% work that they is zero joy in doing it, right? So there's absolutely no joy in doing it.
You have a scale. Yeah, it's like money and time saved, and what's the joy coefficient on that? Yeah,
exactly. But the reaping dividends is not only does it continue, but now it opens up more possibilities for us to understand projects better, right? So have we been, overbidding, underbidding, overstaffing, understaffing projects, right? We can kind of dissect these things and look at them, but you'd have to look at them really, you can't look at them frequently, right? You really have to put in a concerted effort to look at this. But now if we can cross-cut data from the different sources, we can be a little more in tune. And we can now help inform some of the junior folks that, they get into that position of like, the senior person says, I need you to help me put this proposal together. I need you to help me do this together. And that junior person's like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where do I get this from? Where do I get it from? Right. I've been in those shoes before. Right. And the junior person either asks the question or they start to make these micro decisions on a day-to-day basis at their desk. Right. I've done it. You just like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. And then, in 2 days, I'll once I hit a certain milestone, I'll talk to the senior person and go back and forth, right? But if I can be a little more informed and have that information a little more accessible, it'd be useful, right? Or we've toyed around with this idea, this project assistant, right? So on a project, you kind of listed all the people in the project hierarchy not too long ago, like the senior designer, the client engagement leader, project manager, project architect, the junior staff, the spec writer, the technical director, all this stuff, right? Everybody knows a certain portion of that project very well. They know there's other portions of the project that the other people will know, and they know that there's stuff they have no idea who to ask, right? And then there's overlaps, of course, right? But what if there's this opportunity where all the data from this project, all the documents, all the spreadsheets, all the email communications, all the Teams chats, all the BIM data, all the specifications data is fed into a database, a graph database, where you have a large language model that points to the database as a RAG setup and says, okay, how many conference rooms am I supposed to have in this project? And imagine the response being, well, in the contract, it says you need 10 conference rooms, but on this meeting and this day, the client said they need to increase it to 15, right? As a junior, that's amazing, right? I now know I need to do 15 conference rooms instead of 10, and I'll spend my time doing that versus doing what I think I should be doing and then hand it off so that someone could redline it and hand it back to me, and back and forth, right?
Okay, so I have like a really important question here, which is, how do you get your teams to put all of that data into the database? And if you're automating it, I understand. If you're not automating it, how do you actually get them to do that so that you have that useful tool, that RAG, to pull from?
Well, that's sort of all the other stuff I've been working on. So we have the business platform. It has an API. We can access BIM 360 through its API or ACC, whichever you want to call it.
Whatever
we are working...
Forma. It's called Forma now.
It's called Forma now. Yes. We can have a totally different talk about that one. And then the specification software we use a couple of them, but we're working closely with one of them, and we're basically saying, hey, we want an API. We want an API. They said no, and I said, we want an API. Like, I'm not backing down on this request. We want an API. I told them why. Gave them all the use cases, gave them everything we wanted to do with it. I even said, these are the endpoints that we want first, and these are the endpoints we want next, and then next and next. So I gave him like, sort of like a phasing thing.
Here's your roadmap. Go.
I wrote the scopes for each of the endpoints. What's the URL? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are all that stuff, right? What are the responses? I was like, this is what I want. And they were like, all right, we'll start working on it, right? Because they were going to do it. It was in their roadmap. But we pushed and pushed and pushed. So yeah, so by having all these endpoints, we can now pull that data in.
So you don't need the team to push it. I mean, that's the goal.
That's the goal, yeah.
The goal is to automate the ingesting of that information because they're not going to do it. I mean, no. Can we just flat out say that?
No, they're not. No, it's and you know, is that really like a fun thing to do either, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's like, okay, it's your job. I mean, I don't care if it's fun or not, right? Because there's value in that for the company. But then there's like the actual human nature side of things, which is, to your point, right, is there's nothing fun about it. And I already have a million things to do. And, you know, it's like asking people to archive their project email, right?
Oh, yeah, and that doesn't happen.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. So like the project documents are easy. The P drive. So our business platform is easy, right? The specification stuff, we're getting there. The BIM 360 stuff is easy. We kind of fleshed that one out. And my colleague up in Boston, Nervik, amazing guy. He was able to take a 3D model, distill it down, and using some processes on it, develop a graph network from it, and then use that for the LLM. So from it, he was able to say, how do I get from the entry point to this operating theater? And it said, go this way, go that way, make a left, go down to this room, and so on. I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. He does these things where like they're super amazing, and then he like jumps onto the next topic and the next topic. And I was like, no, we need to finish this.
Popcorn. Yeah.
But it was interesting. He was able to identify adjacencies and connectivity and containment and that sort of stuff, like so elements within element and within spaces and so on. So we can start to think about spatial arrangements or spatial requirements, let's put it that way, for some of these healthcare spaces and so on. But yeah, so some of these things are kind of easy. The P drive, we developed a way for scraping the P drive. We've kind of figured that one out. We haven't figured out the Teams thing. There's usually a Teams channel, Teams chat or whatever it's called for the project. We're still working with IT to get the proper permissions to like access these sort of things.
Because they're venting about their consultants and their clients and all kinds of things in there. They're talking about lunch.
Yeah, exactly right. Right. Yeah, so the communication one is definitely sensitive, and I understand that. So I want to know how we can get into these, you know, buckets of information first, right? That's one problem to flesh out. And then once we flesh that one out, we need to figure out how do we identify sensitivity and security around some of these topics. Because, yeah, there could be some confidential emails that go, you know, not everyone on a project is copied in an email. I've seen it, right? When I was at KPF, I actually worked on the vessel at Hudson Yards. The Hudson Yards team at KPF was 60 people. There were only 3 of us that knew about the vessel. Only 3 people within the office, or within the project, sorry, that knew about it. So, like, I understand that not everyone is on every piece of communication, right?
Well, and people think email's private, and so they send private things in there. They could be talking to HR about, you know, whatever. And they're not realizing that it's like this wide open communication protocol. They think it's private, so they're talking sensitive information in there. Yeah,
exactly. So that for now, that's
not the audience of this podcast. I'm not talking to you people. I'm talking to, you know who I'm talking about.
Definitely not. Definitely not. But yeah, that's like one bucket of data, right? The communication, which we're like dancing around. We want to understand sort of the gravity of that topic. But the other one is like meeting notes, for example, meeting minutes. Like those are free game, right? Like we should be able to ingest all of that stuff, and it becomes part of the context and the corpus of the data, right? Because if we could do that, then maybe communication isn't so urgent, right? Like, it should be noted somewhere, right? If there's a design decision that's made, it should be noted, right? Or if there's a change somewhere, it should be noted somewhere. Right? Yeah, so if we could do that, that'd be like an interesting project. Have a project-based assistant.
Yeah. I could see that being super valuable. You made a side comment, I don't know, 20 minutes ago, about understanding. You talked about kind of the two parts of the group that you're in. You're running part of it. Your teammates running the other part. The part that you run, you said one of the things that you understand is how architectural projects work, how they run. And what I'm curious, that you've been in the industry a while now, right? And I'm curious if you feel like your understanding of projects is based on you working on projects back in the day, if that's a current snapshot, because my question really is like, how much has it changed over the years? Because if anything, I mean, there's been a lot of new tools introduced. I think with Avail's new software survey that they released, they did the survey, then they released kind of the findings of that survey. Like the average number, or the number of tools in the tool stack is 86. It's 86 tools, right? Okay, so it didn't used to be like that, right, back in the day. And so I'm curious from your perspective, has the design process changed much? Obviously, there's more fragmentation in like the communication and stuff like that, but with new tools, it seems like the way we go about doing things is really not getting refined. It's kind of going the other direction, if I had to pick. And I'm curious, like, how do you feel like you're keeping up with that, or is it easy? Like, is it just not changing fast enough to matter? Like,
I think it is changing without a doubt. I think at a high level, milestones haven't changed, right? You have your certain percentage SD set, certain percentage DD
the
set.
The phases
right?
of design haven't changed, even though it's just kind of this spectrum now. It's not distinct. I don't know.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. Communication, partially Teams, partially email. So there's some new stuff. Like there wasn't Teams when I was working on projects, right? But that doesn't change things too much. The BIM 360 stuff, it's understandable. I can wrap my head around it. I think when you get lower level into projects, people are using Kanban boards a bit more, which they didn't use when I was working on projects. So that was kind of interesting, right? Do we need to pull the data from the Kanban boards for something to be determined? We'll see, right? So I do think some of it at a lower level is changing. And I ask people, I'm like, oh, how do you do this? How do you do that? Why are you doing it this way? Or what about that way? And, rendering has changed. Or like back in the day, it was like V-Ray for everything. Now it's
only at DD, right? Yeah. Now it's all the time, right? Yeah. So definitely.
Now it's like Enscape and Twinmotion and the AI models and so on, right? So, certain things like that have changed, but I think overall things are.
It doesn't feel too different, right? It's like
no.
There's a lot more tools involved. We're using Miro and Enscape and.
Yeah. It's kind of like going from a manual transmission to like an electric car, right? There's a couple of phases, but you're still a car on the road with a steering wheel and four wheels, like, sleek handlebars.
Doesn't look that different.
Yeah. There's overall it's still the same. Some of the applications like the Avail thing, we use it pretty heavily on our end. It's a great little system there. Always looking to see how we can kind of like use it and leverage it more. Things like that. More tools get added into the fold. We're very cautious about it. My colleague Nick, who runs the digital practice side of things, he has more of a heavy handle on like what we buy and what we don't buy and so on. And I appreciate his approach. He's like, if we bring something new, we should be able to take something off the table. Right.
So Nick is way more practical than most people I know in this industry. I mean, he's maybe not as practical as many CIOs out there, but I mean, just categorically. But one thing, and Nick listens to the show, he's been on the show, and so let's embarrass him a little bit. He's just super practical when it comes to stuff like that. And I really appreciate that in a firm with, from the outside, seemingly unlimited resources. I know that's not true, but let's just categorically say that it's like, compared to many other firms, it's like they can't even imagine what it would be like. And just to have kind of that feet on the ground, or maybe just grounded perspective a lot of times, is really refreshing. And I appreciate talking to him all the time. And I imagine working with him has got to be kind of like that.
Yeah, no, it's great work with him. I've known him since the Flux days. He also got an F last year. So
look at you too. Yeah.
I mean, we're just a bunch of failures, right?
Like you said before the recording actually started, it's like that one time in your life when you can get an F, and it's probably a good thing. Yeah. We can talk a little bit about that too, because it's a little ambiguous to the listening audience. What does that even mean?
Yeah, we can go down that path shortly. But yeah, I think what it's great working with Nick. He is very sort of realistic, and sometimes, people will say a realistic person is just a pessimist in disguise. And I'm kind of realistic too, and sometimes that might be true, but there's a reality there. Like, working at a big firm is like steering a big ship, right? And if something goes wrong, it can go wrong for a while, and you don't notice, right? Until it's too late to course correct, right? So you can't just say, oh yeah, we'll spend money on this and we'll spend money on that. And next thing you know, you have 2,800 different people using different, systems and platforms, and none of them talk to each other. You can't move information around, and it's costing you millions and millions every year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I credit Nick's sort of like level-headedness to also him working on projects, in the younger part of his career too. He built buildings too, just like I did. And he knows project milestones, what they mean. He's been in client meetings, and he understands when clients, say a certain thing, what it means, and how teams are going to react, and, managing expectations and that sort of thing. So I think that's where his value is shining significantly within the digital practice side of things.
I have two stories that I'm thinking of about Nick, that he said something that just, and I'll use an AI term that you see commonly written. It stopped me in my tracks. I keep coming back to this. It's come up many times, but there's two things. I don't need to share both of them at the same time, but right now, but it's like, it's just like the way that he explains something. It's just so obvious.
Yeah.
And we're caught up in the esoteric because we're technologists and we have vision, and we're thinking about where the possibility of things, and at the same time there's all these other kind of friction points holding us back, where it's like, oh my God, there's so many tools to choose from. How did you get this tool out of your tool stack so that you could pursue this much better tool? It's clearly better. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, we just give them all the tools, and they just pick the tools that they need to use for the job. It's like this is just part of doing business. We just have all the tools. Like it's like going into he didn't say this, but it's like going into a woodworker's shop, and like all the tools are there because you don't know what you're going to be working on. And so, and it was just like, oh, that totally makes sense. Like there's this pressure. Maybe it's internal, maybe it's external, of like, we got to whittle this down. We've got to get this under control. We've got to have standards. We've got to blah, 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 blah. And then there's the other side of that coin, which is like, well, what if we don't do all that? What if we don't come up with all these standards and tell people exactly how to do things, and just let them use their own ingenuity to figure it out and do it how they want to do it? Mm-hmm. And it's like, just having a perspective like that, it's like a smack in the face, right? But it's also like, oh my God, you're right. and I appreciate that about that kind of thoughtful perspective that is also just kind of bluntly obvious.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And we have this thing called Company Portal. I think it's like a Microsoft thing, actually. And like, all the software is there. So if you need something, you go and get it, right? But every time, what everyone else doesn't know is that when a vendor comes to us and says, oh, you could do this, you could do that, another AI thing, I'm like, all right, so what can we take off the plate? Like, Are we just going to keep inundating people? Like, do we need another version of Photoshop? Not quite, right? Like, we got one really good photo editing tool. It works really well. Do we need another InDesign? No, we don't. We need one thing that makes a booklet and makes a booklet really well, right? But do we need another Miro? Like, we got Miro, people like it. It works, right? Come to us with something really unique, or at least come to Nick with something really unique.
You're like, email Nick, not me.
I'll set in a meeting. I'm okay with that.
We'll put his email address in the show notes, so the vendors can get in touch.
Exactly right. But like, come with something that's really unique. That's like solving an issue versus doing a close follow of something that already exists, right? And then totally like pregame there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those Fs. Tell the audience what happened to you recently.
The F, man. So, as you mentioned earlier, I'm an architect, right? I got licensed 2015, I think. I passed my last exam. But I was a member of the AIA before that. I was an associate AIA member. So I got licensed, and I've been licensed for a while. And it was actually when I was working at TT, I remember it was pre-COVID, I got an email in February saying, hey, you qualify to be elevated to the College of Fellows. And I was like, cool. What does that mean? Usually people that are FAIA have like way more gray hair and way older. In 2019, I was married in 2019. I didn't have kids. So I looked into it and I was like, all right, this is cool. But then like you get the email in February and then the submission was April. And it was like so I went through what the submission needed to be.
And it's a rather difficult submission process from what I understand. It's a large amount of work.
It is. Yeah. So the April submission was 20 pages. And I was like, all right. So then I just followed what the submissions were. And then the next submission, so you submit in April, you get feedback in May. The next submission is like July or August, so another 2 months. And you get feedback, I guess July, you get feedback in August, and you have another 2 months, and you do the final submission in October. I was like, all right, fine. So then every year I just and then COVID hit, and then we had kids, and, situation went sideways. But every year I kind of looked into it a little bit more. What is it? What do I need? What I need? And I knew some people around me that got it as well. And they went through the process. So I asked, so you need to be, you need to be an AIA member for at least 10 years, right? And that's like the first level of qualification. The next is you need to submit a 40-page portfolio that is very specifically structured. The first page is a letter from your sponsor. The next page is your statement identifying 3 sort of key topics. And then after your statement, there's like 3 paragraphs, one for each topic that you're going to emphasize and go deeper into in your portfolio. The next 18 pages, you dig into various topics like all your awards, all of your project awards, all of projects that you've worked on, speaking engagements, which I actually listed podcasts as well, like the one that I did with you and Randall a while back. Speaking engagements. I listed hackathons too because I was part of hackathons. I judged them. I participated in them. I won in some of them. So that was very kind of like unique to my submission. I listed, I can't remember everything. I listed some teaching stuff that I did, some volunteer work that I'm part of, different organizations, things like that. You have to list your CV, where you've worked and where you went to school and all your certifications, all this other nonsense. So that's the next 18 pages. And then the last 20 pages is your exhibits. And you got to show 7 to 10 exhibits, right? So it's roughly 2 pages per exhibit, give or take. And each exhibit needs to back up those 3 topics that you mentioned in the beginning, right? I think mine was like computational design as a craft, process and innovation, teaching and mentorship. I've been teaching for almost 19 years at this point, different universities, helping students out in many different ways, but also sort of mentoring within the industry. And that means a lot to me because, when I started about 20 years ago as a computational designer, everyone was like, what the hell do you do? Are you like the math guy? Like, what do you do? So I went from an industry that like had no idea to what I do to an industry that hopefully accepts, incoming, design technology folks, computational designers, and that sort of thing. So I never had a clear career path. So I was always in this like shade of gray. So it means a lot to, show people, when someone comes up to you like, hey, I want to do this. How do I get to that point in my career? And I tell them how I cut my teeth on certain things and things to watch out for, things to say, things not to say. Leadership doesn't care how you got the project done. They just want to know you got the project done. Yeah. They'll figure out the how. They'll ask you about the how after, once they realize your talents and your skills. They're like, this guy, this girl, they're on to something. What are they doing? How are they doing it? How are you doing it so much better or so much faster? How are you doing something that we couldn't do before? Right? That will come after the fact, right? So mentorship is like a big thing. So going back to the portfolio, I had 10 exhibits. One of them was the teaching and mentorship. Another one was actually Flux. Like I put in my portfolio, the work that I did at a tech startup. And I didn't know how that was going to go. But I felt like it was important because, in one or two pages, it was hard to express the value that Flux brought to some people. I remember I was at an event in Chicago, and someone came up to me and they're like, "Oh, you work at Flux?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "Thank you." I was like, "Why?" It's like, "Well, because of you, I'm now able to do these things." And I got promoted 2 levels in the office.
Oh, wow. I mean, there was a time, Charlie, remember at AU, like Flux came up in every design technology presentation because that was how people got stuff over the bridge. I mean, it was the way to do it, basically. I mean, there was a few kind of small scale Grasshopper plugins that, even stuff maybe that David Manns did at TT, right? Like through Excel. But still, that was kind of like the name brand for interoperability. It was Flux for a long time.
It was definitely.
Or for at least a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, at least. Yeah, and we kind of, it made a big splash in the industry. It was one of the first times that a startup had such an influence in the industry. It came in as a force to be recognized. People used it. People liked it. People didn't want to pay for it, as always. But yeah, so I put in, product manager as my role, and I put that in as part of my portfolio, because why not, right? It is part of my, what defines my career. It is so going through this whole portfolio thing. You also have to like document all the photography that you use. So, all the projects I worked on and everything, I had to find the photography I wanted. I had to go back to KPF marketing and all the other, everywhere else I was at, and say, hey, these are the photos I want to use. Can you give me the contact information for the photographers? Because I didn't know who took the picture. I just don't know. So they gave me the photographer's information. So then I had to go find the photographers, chase them down, get them to sign a release form. Some of them signed it. Some of them ghosted me. Some of them don't exist anymore. Some of them would sign their own release form, but not the AIA one. Like a lot of that. And then you have to submit like a contact sheet with each photo, the photographer and the credits and everything, and then submit all these forms. That was a big hurdle. No one tells you about that. So if anyone's going to do this FAIA
this is a public service announcement right now.
Yeah,
right.
Look into the whole photography thing, because man, that's a big pain in the rear. But you also got to do it for all your diagrams and images and all sorts of stuff. If something can't be shown, you have to say it can't be shown. Like a friend of mine, he did a lot of government work, embassy work and things like that. So you have to tell them so that they redact it and so on. So it could be part of the submission, but it gets redacted down the road. So it's a lengthy process. And I think the part of the process that I didn't fully, so every exhibit you submit, you actually have to get a third party to confirm that what you're saying is correct and that was your role on that project. So for the 10 exhibits I submitted, I had to reach out to 10 different people to say, hey, this is what I'm going to submit. All I need you to do is confirm over email that, yes, this is accurate, or no, this is not. And I have to, rewrite it. So I had to do that as well. I had to get 7 reference letters, which I put my sponsor in touch. So you have to get a sponsor that sort of guides you through the path, the submission path. And
somebody who's already FAIA.
Yes, correct. Or someone that's already FAIA. So then you get 7 people, 5 of which have to be AIA members, 2 of which don't have to be. Put them in touch, put your sponsor in touch with them, and your sponsor works with them to craft reference letters that then they submit. But you don't get to see them. I don't get to see those letters.
Okay.
So there's a lot of coordination, a lot of effort going on there. But the one thing that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with, and I'll openly talk about it, is that actually there's 2, one more than other. The portfolio, when you read it, sounds very selfish. It's very much about me.
About you, man. Right.
And no, that old phrase, no man is an island. Whenever I present, I'm happy to present about projects, but it's always we and us. And this is how we look at it, right? And I use a very general we because it could be us as a team, us as a firm, us as an industry, right? It's we're all in this, right? So I didn't like the selfishness tone that you had to, and maybe I'm being a little harsh by calling it selfishness, but like I did this. Yeah, I did it, but also I worked with others around me, right? So that part I didn't like. The other part I don't like is, and I'm pretty vocal about this one. So your submission has to fit within one of 7, what they call objects. And I don't know why the hell they call them objects, but there's 7 objects. First, object 1 is design. Object 2 is technical. I don't remember the other ones, but there's another object that's research. There's another object that's teaching. There's another object that's, I think, volunteer work, right? But there's no object for technology, right? And I can understand that you could be a designer and use technology. You could be a technical person and use technology and so on and so forth. But there's also other people out there, CIOs, CTOs, digital practice leaders, all these other folks that, they've made significant contributions to the advancing the industry forward, which is sort of the thesis of being elevated to fellowship, right? That you're moving the industry forward, that are on the technology side, and there's no voice or place for them, right? So, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, there was a thing in the AIA New York and for all the fellows, right? And I didn't realize we actually had to say something. I just thought we're going to go there, they say something about us, we take a picture and, have a glass of wine or something. But as they started calling out names, and I was the second one, the first guy went up and he had folded out this piece of paper and started reading. I was like, oh shit. Whoops. Yeah.
I didn't read the brief.
There was nothing in there that said, come prepared to say something, right? And my wife and my 2 kids were there. They were up on the mezzanine. The kids were playing. My kids are 2 and 6, right? So, you thank everybody and all this other stuff. And at the end, I held a solid moment and I said, my motivation for doing this is to become a voice for people that follow in this career path to show that they have a place, right? I'm not a typical designer. I'm not a typical project manager or technical director or anything like that. I'm in the computational design space. If I can do it, you can do it, right? And there's a lot of CIOs, CTOs, digital practice people, and so on that aren't represented or have a place to feel represented. And that needs to change. And that's why
won't even apply because they don't feel like there's a chance, right? And it's a ton of work. And if it's just a black box and there's no direct example of that kind of outcome, then what are the chances? Pretty low. Okay, not going to deal with that. I mean, and so, I mean, what you're talking about right now is kind of a really nice bookend to when we met in the fall, right? When I moderated the panel about leadership, and it was leaders in firms who got there through their technology roles. Examples on the stage of the audience in the room where they could potentially go if they so desired, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about right now with FAIA and that kind of position of responsibility and leadership inside of the AIA, at the professional level.
Yeah, no, totally. And I remember the panel that you moderated, and some of the people that I found, inspirational, so, or some of my employers, right? James Brogan at KPF, Morali here at Perkins&Will, Rob Latani at TT, Heath May at HKS, right? He's also another fellow, right? Neil Katz at SOM, lifelong computational designer from way before, I even knew what a computer was, right? There's a small handful of individuals, right? But it's not a good, you really have to like sift through.
You gotta look. You gotta look hard.
Yeah. And when I found out that Neil got elevated, I sent him, him and I talk once in a while. We see each other at events, and I sent him an email. I was like, congratulations. I was like, this is pretty big. And that was motivating for me to say, hey, yeah, I can do this too. I think I could do it. Let me phrase it. I think I could do it.
It's possible. Well, Charlie, this has been a fun conversation all over the place, which is exactly perfect for this podcast. I appreciate it. Where can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing at Perkins&Will? As I assume LinkedIn's maybe the best place to follow you, but go ahead and tell everybody.
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. I respond to messages and everything. I'm not a Twitter person. I hated it before. I dislike it even more now. Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. And then depending on where that conversation goes, I'm more than happy to help people out and give them my lessons learned so that they don't have to go through those moments in their career, and hopefully they can, pay that forward as they move on.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Until next time. Great talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. That actually means a lot. I have two things I'd ask of you before you go. One, hit subscribe right now if you haven't already. It's totally free. It takes one click, and I'm really trying to get to 1,500 subscribers. We're not there yet, and every single one counts. If this show has been worth your time, that's the easiest thing you can do. Number two, if you want to go further, if you want to support independent coverage of this industry and get ad-free episodes of the podcast, plus my full Leadership Edge newsletter, head over to TRXL.co and click the join button. The link is in the show notes. $12 a month, and you'll be one of the people who actually makes this possible. All right, that's a wrap. Subscribe, share it with someone who would get it, and I'll see you in the next one.